Welcome back to Pokemon Episode Summaries. Today, I'll be doing episode 173, Power Play. The episode begins with Ash and the gang suddenly walking along a path when they hear some sounds and look over to find that it was a Pokemon battle going on. And they decide to go up to the two trainers who were fighting, leading Ash to recognize one of the trainers being Gary. That's right, Gary had returned, and he was battling a trainer from Cherry Grove City named Alex Davis, just a random-ass dude. Alex starts things off by sending out his Alakazam to attack, while Gary calls out a Pokemon that Ash had never seen before, so he uses his Pokedex on it, only to find out that it was Umbreon, a new evolution of Eevee. That's right, there was now new evolutions of Eevee, even though it already had 3. Ash then realizes that this Umbreon must have been the evolved form of the Eevee that he fought back in Pallet Town. Gary warns his Umbreon to study the Alakazam and not rush ahead, as Alakazam starts off with the first attack being a Zap Cannon. Umbreon is able to dodge by quickly leaping into the air though, so Alakazam then tries Psychic, but since Umbreon was a Dark-type Pokemon, the Psychic had no effect, because Dark-type Pokemon were overpowered. Alakazam then tries charging at Umbreon with a headbutt, but Umbreon was able to dodge this, and since Alakazam was still charging forward at such a high speed, Umbreon was able to go up behind him and catch him off guard with a tackle. The Alakazam is quickly able to recover, and then tries to go for a Dynamic Punch, but Gary avoided this by having his Umbreon run around with agility. Alakazam then made copies of itself with Double Team, and Gary commended the trainer on actually doing a cool move for once, so he warned Umbreon not to be caught off guard, and thankfully, Umbreon wasn't, as it was able to jump and hit the real Alakazam almost instantly, doing so by staying calm and not letting the overwhelming copies overwhelm it. Umbreon then goes for a quick attack, however Alakazam evades by using Teleport. Umbreon loses its cool at this point and begins to search around for the Alakazam, and Alex uses the opportunity to command Alakazam to use Hyper Beam, wanting to end the battle. However, this results in the Hyper Beam charge being spotted by Gary, and he's able to warn Umbreon to dodge it before it strikes, due to Umbreon jumping up, and then Umbreon finishes the battle with a hidden power, knocking Alakazam out. Alex gracefully accepts defeat, and Misty and Brock commend Gary's Umbreon on how well it was trained and raised, and this leads Ash to get a little jealous, so he decides to go and challenge Gary with Pikachu, believing that he could beat the Umbreon. However, upon challenging him and running down to him, Gary immediately rejects him, stating that there'd be no point in Pikachu facing Umbreon, since Pikachu was beaten when Umbreon was in its mere Eevee form. And Umbreon also now knew all of Pikachu's attacks, so Ash couldn't do anything to catch it off guard, which would make the battle boring. Gary then begins to take his leave, but Ash rebuttals that he could battle Gary without Pikachu, and use one of his new Pokemon instead, as he sends out Noctowl, Chikorita, Totodile, and Cyndaquil, trying to intimidate Gary with all of his new Pokemon. However, this intimidation act fails, as Chikorita immediately goes straight to Ash for attention, Cyndaquil just walks around, not knowing what the fuck was going on, and Totodile starts dancing, and Noctowl falls asleep. Ash panics and tries to order his Pokemon to act more professional, but before they can, Gary just walks away. Ash tries to yell at him as he walks away that he would beat him the next time they battled, but he was unsure of this even himself, as he saw his Pokemon had returned to doing their usual goofs and gaffs. With Gary gone, Ash and the gang decide to continue into a town on their way to a Pokemon Center, and along the way, Brock and Misty continue glazing up Gary's Umbreon, stating how well-trained and cool and awesome it was, also complimenting Gary himself in the process. Misty asks Ash if he thought the same, but she should know that Ash obviously didn't. I mean, why the fuck would he respect Gary? So he simply tells Misty to shut the fuck up. This leads Brock to stop glazing up Gary as well, not wanting to anger Ash any further, and they eventually reach a Pokemon Center, where they decide to have dinner, with Ash stating that he needed all the burgers that he could get if he wanted to have the strength to beat Gary, and just the strength in general to train for that matter. Meanwhile, Team Rocket was spying on Ash and the gang in the Pokemon Center, and they came up with a plan to try and sneak through the back door of the center and steal some of its food. Jesse liked the idea, and they proceeded to go outside, along with Meowth and Wobbuffet, to sneak up and try and steal the food. However, Meowth was too busy staring at the sunset. Wobbuffet, wanting to get Meowth's attention, interrupts Meowth's relaxation as he sneaks up on him from behind. Pissed off, Meowth goes to scratch Wobbuffet. However, Wobbuffet uses Counter to save himself from being scratched in the face, and Meowth ends up being the one getting scratched. Counter reflected the attack back. Upon seeing Counter actually being used in a useful way, this gives Jesse an idea relating to their scheme. Meanwhile, back with Ash in the game, Ash began to do exactly what he said he was going to do, which was eat a whole mound of burgers, wanting to charge up for his battle. Brock argues that it could be weeks or months until his battle with Gary, because they didn't know when they would see him again, but Ash just rebuttals that meant that he had to spend weeks and months eating nothing but burgers. Just then, the lights in the Pokemon Center go out, and Ash and the gang go up to Nurse Joy to ask what was going on, which she reveals it was a blackout. Wow, that's not obvious. More interestingly, though, she also reveals that she tried calling the power plant already to get the power back on, but they weren't responding to her calls. Maybe it's just because the power went out like 2 seconds ago? Anyways, Nurse Joy then looks outside and sees that all the lights in all the buildings in town were also off. It was an entire town-wide outage, so that just made it even more suspicious that the power plant wasn't responding to her calls. This just caused Nurse Joy to get extremely worried, as she stated that a lot of the equipment used to treat Pokemon in the center was of course run by electricity, so without the power, then all the Pokemon that needed treatment wouldn't be able to get it. Particularly, Pokemon in intensive care, which was the most critical care, so it was really a disaster. Despite Brock's growth last episode, he was still a tremendous simp, so upon seeing how nervous Nurse Joy was, he saw an opportunity to impress her if he and Ash and the gang went to the power plant to check out what was wrong. So he asked her for the location, and Joy informed him that it was in the mountains north of the city, so with that, Brock convinced Ash and Misty to come with him as they set off for the power plant. Meanwhile, Gary was currently camping, having started a fire to cook some food for himself, and he was giving Umbreon some Pokemon food. He looked into the town in the distance, obviously expecting to see some lights, only to see that it was a blackout, so he immediately questioned what was going on. He can also make out Ash and the gang running towards the power plant, although he didn't know where they were going, but decides to follow them regardless. Very curious as to what they were up to. Meanwhile, Team Rocket was inside a giant mechanical mech, and they were at the power plant, currently powering it up with electricity, having it connected with a large extension cord. This mech was none other than a gigantic Wobbuffet mech, insinuating that this mech was Jessie's idea that she had gotten from seeing Wobbuffet use counter. Now having enough electricity, they power up the mech's engines and state their objectives, which were to raid the Pokemon Center of all of its food, as well as steal Pikachu and any other Pokemon that were in the center. So pretty basic plan. As they make their way to the center, Meowth and James comment on how well the electricity was serving the mech, but Jessie warns them not to get overconfident, explaining that they always seem to lose when they do. As if on cue, Ash and the gang showed up on Team Rocket's radar on the machine, indicating that they were extremely close by. When Jessie realized this, she was filled with excitement. She would get to use the Wobbuffet mech's primary feature, its counter feature against them. Oh my god. Seeing that Ash and the gang were heading back to the power plant, Team Rocket decided to stop going to the Pokemon Center and head there as well. When Ash and the gang arrive at the power plant, the first thing they see is a whole bunch of workers tied up, probably by Team Rocket. Actually, most definitely by Team Rocket. They go to free them, but Team Rocket then show up in their Mecha Wobbuffet. They proceed to do their motto and explain how their mech was powered, explaining that it also had the ability to counter any single attack, clarifying that because of this, they would finally be able to capture Pikachu. Pikachu doubts this, and Ash has him use Thunderbolt, but sure enough, the mech uses its version of counter as a trapdoor opens in its chest that absorbs the electric attack, that sends the attack right back at Pikachu, with even more power than it had beforehand, showing the power of counter. Upon realizing that Thunderbolt was futile, and it was the attack that they usually relied on the most, Ash and the gang instantly make a run for it. However, the mech simply follows them, which means that Ash and the gang have to try and defend themselves somehow. So, Ash sends out his Totodile, and Misty sends out her Staryu and Poliwhirl, and the three of them use their water guns, but those attacks just get reflected back at them as well. Ash and the gang fully haven't grasped the concept of a mech using a move and question how all their attacks were being repelled, leading Jessie to explain how it was possible, and demanding that since Ash and the gang obviously couldn't win, they take the chance to just give up Pikachu, and then they would let them go. Despite having all the odds stacked against them, Ash and the gang obviously refuse, and make a beeline towards the nearby forest to escape, with Team Rocket still following, preparing to punch with their mech, in an attempt to grab Pikachu as well, with the same punch, although they were still connected to the power plant with their cord, so their cord stretched way too far, which caused the machine to stop, since the cord only stretched so far. So once it couldn't stretch out any further, that meant that the mech was now stuck in place. Just then, Gary's voice can be heard as Umbreon shows up, and Umbreon uses a tackle to break the plug in the power plant, connecting the cord and the robot mech. Obviously, Ash and the gang weren't that far into the woods if they could still hear Gary and Umbreon from the power plant, but regardless, this meant that Team Rocket was now stranded in their mech and couldn't move whatsoever, as the power cord was now destroyed, or at least the plug connecting it. With Team Rocket now immobilized, Ash and the gang run back to the power plant, where they meet up with Gary, and the four of them free all the workers. As Team Rocket saw Ash and the gang run off, James and Meowth decided to give up, realizing they had no chance, but Jessie told them that she had a second plan, clarifying that the plan did not involve the mech moving. Anyways, when Ash and the gang and Gary freed all the workers, Brock instantly questioned them on how they could get the power restored, stating that the Pokemon Center was in desperate need of power before the Pokemon died. The workers are immensely thankful, but despite it being their literal job, they can't come up with a way to get the power back working, stating that with the damage that Team Rocket caused with their cord, it would take forever to get the power back on. Just then, though, one of the workers actually manages to come up with a good idea after being yelled at by Brock, which is simply to use the backup generator until they can get the power back on. However, the problem with the backup generator is that in order to use it, the water gate had to be opened first because the power was generated from the water. Upon hearing this, Gary instantly decides to take action and begins running to where the water gate was located after learning about its location, and Ash decides to follow, not wanting to be overshown by Gary. However, on their way to the backup generator, Team Rocket shows up, having initiated Jessie's new plan, which was simply to have the mech move by having James and Meowth pedal with it. Essentially, there was a manual mode to the mech. James and Meowth were pissed, as Jessie had forced them to do the dirty work, and she had even lied to them that the mech didn't even have to move for her plan. Fucking bitch. Jessie was, of course, driving the mech, at least its main hand controls, and she proceeded to go for a robot punch. However, it just barely missed Ash Pikachu and his Totodile, who was still out. But then, Jessie goes for what she calls the Robo-Mecha Wobbuffet Chop, and this does hit Ash, knocking him down, leading for Jessie to go with the Mecha Wobbuffet Kick to finish Ash off. That's right, she was going to murder Ash. But, just kidding, because James and Meowth were tired as fuck from doing all the pedaling, so they suddenly stopped, stopping the mech from moving forward, which obviously stopped the kick as well. Seeing an opportunity, Ash got back up and had Pikachu use Thunderbolt. However, the Thunderbolt was merely absorbed by the mech and recharged it. Damn, even though Jessie didn't counter, the machine still beat them because it just fucking absorbed the power. Damn, that sucks. And this now meant that the machine was back to full power thanks to Pikachu's electricity, and was able to charge towards Ash, going in for the kick this time. However, Ash got an idea as he sent out Cyndaquil, and has him use Flamethrower to try and burn the mech, but he for some reason forgot about the counter strategy, so the Flamethrower was merely absorbed, getting ready to be repelled. This leads Ash to get an actual good idea as he sends out Chikorita and has her use Vine Whip. Team Rocket laugh, as they assume that this attack would just be countered as well. However, Chikorita actually uses the Vine Whip to grab the mech's gates that absorb the attacks and close them so that the attacks couldn't be absorbed anymore and repelled. This was an even better idea, not just because of that, but because since the gates were now shut, this trapped Cyndaquil's Flamethrower inside of the mech before it could be shot back at it, so that meant that the mech started burning from the inside out, causing it to explode and sending Team Rocket blasting off. With Team Rocket gone, Ash and Gary resumed their trek to the water gate to open it up so that it can power the generator. However, when they arrive at the water gate, Gary realizes that the handle to open it was missing for some reason. Thankfully, Totodile is able to find it inside of a little cabin that was nearby. However, he only spotted the handle inside the window. He couldn't actually get inside the cabin as the door was locked. Great! Thankfully, Cyndaquil's strong tackle attack was enough to break the lock on the door, breaking it down. But unfortunately, the cabin was dark inside, so they could barely even see where the fuck the handle was. So this led Gary to use his Umbreon, who uses a flash attack to glow itself, which makes the room brighter so they can see. Yay! They find the handle, but it's attached to a lock chain bolted to the wall. What the fuck, man? Why was the handle so well protected? Thankfully, Ash was able to use Cyndaquil's flamethrower, followed by Totodile's water gun, to severely damage the chain, and then have Chikorita finish it off with Razor Leaves, completely cutting the lock. Ash then runs back to the water gate and attaches the handle, but our trouble still wasn't fucking done, as the handle was stuck and wouldn't turn properly. Great! It turns out that Ash was just simply too weak on his own, though, as once Misty and Brock arrive, and Gary and all of their Pokemon also help, it was enough strength to turn the handle of the water gate, meaning that water could now flow out. Unfortunately, when Ash and the gang and Gary returned to the power plant, they learned that the backup generator still wasn't working, since it was so old that it wasn't putting out enough electricity. Thankfully, Ash just had Pikachu use Thunderbolt to give it a little bit more, after being attached to the generator with some wires, and this thankfully lets the power be restored. Yay, finally! Ash thanks Gary for all his help, and also thanks him for putting their rivalry aside for the greater good, but Gary thinks that was a little too fucking cheesy, so he just begins to walk off. Although, he does admit that Ash had gotten stronger after seeing his Pikachu's Thunderbolts, and adds that Ash may not have to ask him for a battle next time, as Gary might be excited for the battle. Ash was surprised at apparently having Gary's respect now. I guarantee you that won't stay. It always seems to go away. But Ash just says that he was still looking forward to the battle, no matter who challenged who, stating that it would happen eventually. Ash and Gary then say their goodbyes to each other as Gary walks away, and the episode ends with Ash and the gang returning to the Pokemon Center, and Nurse Joy thanking them because the power had been restored to the Pokemon Center, saving all the Pokemon's lives. Yay! Brock takes one last opportunity to flirt with Nurse Joy, since, that was the entire reason why he wanted to go to the power plant, was to impress her, but Misty simply drags him away as Ash and the gang continue on their journey.